So after the outrage, the options available before us, what is the diplomatic endgame? I asked Suhasini, one of the famous journalists who's well versed in Pakistan affairs and Kashmir. And this is what she said. We have basically a reactive policy with Pakistan. What should we do at a strategic level? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I do think that the Pahalgam terror attack has crossed a red line in many respects. The first one really being the brutality of the attack itself, the fact that it was meant not only to strike fear amongst Indians or to crush the Kashmiri economy that was just beginning to pick up, but also to send a communal message to religiously divide the groups and to execute 26 men who were killed on April 22nd. I think that's the first part. The second seems to be a direct link to comments made by the Pakistani military establishment that held India responsible for an attack a month ago in which 26 people were killed on the Jafar Express in Balochistan, and a kind of almost like a message sent by the Pakistani army chief on Kashmir being a jugular vein that cannot be ignored by Pakistan just a few days before this attack. So that must be investigated. I think the third part that really does cross a red line is the operations themselves. The fact that the 4 men believed to be responsible for this massacre in a meadow in Pahalgam were well trained enough to be able to not just come into that meadow, to know the security environment there, to continue killing people for more than half an hour, and then to be exfiltrated or to be taken out of there safely as well and are still being looked for. I think that's the third part. And all of these need a kind of serious consideration by our security establishment, by security forces, as well as strategists looking for where this is going to lead next. In terms of what should be done next, I think there's no question that the government is considering all its military options. So the diplomatic measures that have been taken, the bilateral as well as the multilateral measure taken in terms of the Indus Water Treaties suspension, but also now that the government has made it clear that the Prime Minister has given a free hand to the military, to security forces to look at a response. And I think those have to be also considered very carefully, because if you look at the Indian response after the 2008 attack, the 2016 attack on the Pathankot Air Force Base, when Pakistani investigators were actually invited in to help with the investigation, to look at the response to the Uri attack in 2016 of September, where there was a cross-LOC strike, to look at the 2019 Pulwama attack and the response there. It is clear that the government would want to try something new. The element of surprise has to be maintained as much as possible in terms of sending a message back to Pakistan. But it's also extremely important to ensure that that message is not just a message of revenge or of wreaking havoc in retaliation. That message has to not only be a deterrent against such heinous attacks in the future, it has to look at how to ensure that Pakistan itself changes its policies towards supporting terror groups, towards sending proxies across the LOC. That's a much more difficult, much more long-term situation. I think when you ask about the idea of what is the strategic thinking that is needed with Pakistan, I think the first thing that perhaps has been shown over the last 30, 40 years, but particularly in the last decade and a half or 2 decades since the Mumbai attacks, is firstly, while talking to Pakistan doesn't necessarily ensure that there won't be terror attacks, not talking does not give you that outcome either. So one must be strategic about it. It may be very difficult for a country that has suffered so much at the hands of a neighbor to actually think about diplomacy with that neighbor. But you have to think about what this achieves for India's interests. After all, in 2021, India did negotiate a ceasefire at the LOC with Pakistan, which was very useful when we saw what was happening with China at the LAC at that time. So when it is in India's interest, it is possible to negotiate. When there was a misfiring, a mistake with a missile test firing that happened in India, and that missile then landed in Pakistan, there was a back channel in place that discussed de-escalation, telling Pakistan to wait for a longer inquiry, and that inquiry found that a mistake had been made. So it is possible to do that kind of back channel talks as well when it is necessary to de-escalate. Do we need to think broader? My own suggestion has been that while we need to look at all the different military, escalatory, retaliatory, undercover, psyops, all kinds of warfare when it comes to this kind of dealing with Pakistan, I think it's also necessary to look at an idea that has been built over years but been rejected in more recent times. That is the peace process we saw between 2003 and 2008 that was negotiated by two Indian governments, in fact, both in terms of the Vajpayee government and then the Manmohan Singh government, that looked at ways of making the LOC a de facto international boundary. This is something Pakistan will not want. This is something many in India will also object to, because of course there is a parliamentary resolution that says Kashmir is all of Kashmir is an integral part of India. But if you want to somehow end the Pakistani dream of continuously using the impermanence and the permeability of the line of control into Kashmir as a way to carry out its proxy war, then you have to consider the idea of turning it into an international boundary as well. So I think it's necessary to have intellectual discussions, to have all kinds of discussions over what can be a long-term solution with Pakistan. But I think the policy of saying Pakistan doesn't count, Pakistan can't do anything to us, and that we can completely ignore Pakistan and cut it out of our lives, I think that is not a very sensible or pragmatic view either.